A cleaning lady answered the phone in Dutch. The next day, the hotel owner asked to see her. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Claire Jennings adjusted her name badge on the lilac uniform as she pushed the cleaning cart down the 28th floor hallway of the St. Regis Midtown Manhattan. It was her week on the executive floor, and even with heavy, sleep-deprived eyes, she mentally repeated the vocabulary she'd studied the night before. Her supervisor, Linda Carter, appeared, frowning as Claire's phone buzzed for the third time. "That's the third message from the bank this week," she said in a firm tone. Claire slipped the phone back in her pocket with a quiet sigh and replied, "I'm taking care of it, Linda. The course ends next month." Linda, used to seeing hopeful young women in those halls, remarked that Spanish might be more useful. Claire didn't respond. The elevator arrived, and Claire stepped inside. The doors closed in front of the reflection of a woman few really knew. Her hair was tied back in a plain bun, dark circles under her eyes, her uniform spotless. Behind that ordinary image was a graduate in international relations from NYU, fluent in English and Spanish. Dutch was her fourth language. On the executive floor, where each suite cost more than she made in a month, she started her usual routine: clean, organize, leave before the guests woke up. In the last room on the list, her phone buzzed again. It was Professor Van Doren. Claire hesitated for a moment, but answered. "Professor, is something wrong?" The voice on the other end sounded excited. In clear Dutch, he announced that Claire had scored the highest mark on her language proficiency test. The language she had fought so hard to learn was now officially part of her skill set. She brought her hand to her mouth to stifle a joyful laugh. 3 years of night classes and strict budgeting had led to this moment. Now, she was ready to apply for a position at the Dutch consulate in New York. So absorbed in the conversation, she didn't notice the door of the suite next door open. Ethan Blake, the owner of the Blake International Hotel chain, stood in the doorway, silent. He simply listened. That fluent, gentle female voice speaking an uncommon language stood out against the lilac uniform. Her tone was gracious, thankful, sincere. When Claire turned and saw him, she froze. She recognized him from magazine covers, from the photos in the hotel's corridors. Her heart started a race. She quickly ended the call. Iqbal J.E. later Tarek, Professor. Ethan remained in place, watching her. After a moment, he said, "Good morning." I didn't know he had staff who spoke Dutch. His voice was calm but firm. Claire nodded slightly. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have answered during work." Ethan crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe. "Where did you learn?" Claire hesitated. She usually kept her education to herself. "Online course. Just a hobby." He studied her, as if trying to understand what she wasn't saying. Before she could leave, he asked, "You mentioned the consulate. Do you have a degree in that field?" Claire saw no reason to lie. "International relations. New York University." Ethan nodded, and a brief silence followed. Then he said, "I have a meeting now, Ms. Jennings, but I'd like to speak with you again. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. in my office. Ask the front desk to send you up." Claire didn't answer right away. He turned and walked into the room, closing the door gently behind him. She stood there, hands resting on the cart, trying to process what had just happened. Claire spent the night digging through the small closet in her Queens apartment. She chose a simple black dress and the same pair of shoes she wore to her graduation ceremony. Looking into the stained bathroom mirror, she tied back her brown hair tightly. She left early, deciding to walk the last few blocks to the St. Regis to calm her thoughts. At the reception desk, the shift manager, Monica Lewis, recognized her and nodded toward the elevator with a curious look. "Mr. Blake is already expecting you." Claire nodded and made her way up to the mezzanine level, where the executive office overlooked Park Avenue. Ethan was standing by the window. When she walked in, he turned and gestured to the chair across from his desk. 2 coffees were already poured, sitting beside an open folder. "Punctuality earns points," he said. Claire thanked him and sat down, folding her hands in her lap. "I looked you up last night," he added with a slight smile. "Graduated with honors, interned at the embassy in Lisbon, worked with migrants." Claire stayed quiet, surprised at how much he knew. "How did you find all that out?" Ethan replied matter-of-factly, "I have resources." He studied her expression before continuing. "Your fluency in Dutch stood out, but what impressed me even more was your choice of language." "Why Dutch?" Claire took a breath. "The Dutch consulate in New York posted a job that required fluency in English and Dutch. I thought it was a long shot, but still a chance." Ethan nodded. "So why are you here?" Claire answered calmly, "Bills don't wait. I sent resumes, but no one called back. This job paid the rent." Ethan leaned forward over the desk. "Claire, I didn't ask you here to talk about rules or reprimand you." He slid a sheet of paper toward her. "We're opening a hotel in Amsterdam. I need someone like you." Claire frowned slightly. He went on, "It's for an international expansion assistant role. New position, reporting directly to me." She skimmed the offer. The salary was high. The benefits included housing, health coverage, legal support, and performance bonuses. For a few seconds, Claire couldn't speak. "Why me?" Ethan leaned back. "Because you know what it means to build something from the ground up, and you had the guts to bet on yourself." She looked at the contract again, still processing. He finished, "Take it home. Read it carefully. No pressure, but if you want it, the job is yours." Claire picked up the paper and tucked it carefully into her purse. As she stood, he added, "Whatever you decide, don't go back to cleaning services." Claire walked through the lobby under curious stares. Maybe it was because she wasn't in uniform. Stepping through the revolving doors, the cold air brought a wave of relief. She walked to the corner plaza and sat down. Pulled the contract out once more. After so long, something real was finally within reach. Not a distant promise, an actual choice. The world outside looked the same, but something inside her had already shifted. On Sunday, Claire spent hours at the small kitchen table in her Queens apartment, carefully reviewing every clause of the contract. She felt a mix of excitement and uncertainty. The offer was tempting, but it meant a drastic change. Moving overseas, adapting to a new culture, taking on a major leadership role. On the other hand, it was everything she had worked toward since graduation: professional recognition, financial stability, and a real opportunity to apply her academic background. By late afternoon, she took a deep breath, placed the contract in an envelope, and slipped it into her bag. Her decision was made. The next morning, she put on her lilac uniform one last time, tied her hair tightly, and walked down the building stairs with steady steps. At the hotel, she approached the front desk and asked to be sent up to Ethan Blake's office. She was let in without ceremony. He motioned to the chair across from him and waited. Claire handed him the envelope and simply said, "Signed." Ethan didn't look surprised. He reviewed the filled-out sections and nodded with a faint smile. "Great. We'll get the legal side sorted. We leave in 2 weeks." He explained that the new hotel in Amsterdam was still in the planning stages and that the first few months would focus on building the team, sourcing local suppliers, and forming institutional partnerships. Claire listened closely, mentally noting the key points. He also assured her full support for the move: documents, housing, and cultural adaptation. Everything had been arranged in advance. In the days that followed, Claire officially resigned from the hotel. Linda Carter was surprised, but gave her a warm smile. "You were meant for more than this, Claire. I always knew." Monica at the front desk joked that she wanted a job too. At home, Claire started packing up her few belongings and reaching out to the handful of people she still kept in touch with. Many of her college friends had drifted away. Some sent messages of congratulations. Others didn't respond at all. One former classmate, Tara Collins, replied with a flat, "Wow, working with Blake now? Impressive." Claire didn't take any of it to heart. She was used to moving forward on her own. At night, she organized spreadsheets of what needed to be done, read about Dutch labor laws, and reviewed old materials on international diplomacy. She didn't allow herself to get distracted. She needed to be ready. One evening, she got a call from Ethan. They talked about logistics, flights, and timelines. At the end of the call, he said, "I'm glad you accepted." Claire replied, "So am I. Thank you for seeing what I could become." He paused before answering, and when he did, his voice was gentler. It was impossible not to. From her very first day in Amsterdam, Claire realized there would be no time to hesitate. The morning after she arrived, she was welcomed by a small team of engineers, architects, and analysts hired locally to help structure the new hotel. The temporary office was modest, located on the second floor of a dark brick building with wide windows overlooking the canal. The European winter chill crept in through barely noticeable cracks, and the strong scent of coffee lingered in the air as everyone juggled tasks in Dutch, English, and occasionally French. Ethan made a point of including Claire in every strategic meeting, asking for her input naturally and giving her room to lead presentations. Even during the more demanding sessions, she adapted quickly, though at first she carried the quiet uncertainty of someone transitioning from a manual role to an executive position. Still, she kept a firm posture, listened attentively, and spoke with clarity, even in front of seasoned suppliers and international partners. During lunch breaks, Claire used the time to practice her Dutch, trading simple phrases and local expressions with coworkers. She earned respect effortlessly, thanks to her fluency and the way she articulated ideas and solutions with precision. In the evenings, at her functional apartment, small but well-lit, with a view of a quiet canal in the Jordan district, she organized reports, read documents, and studied Dutch labor laws. Over time, Ethan's messages, always short and to the point, began to include subtle compliments or suggestions for readings on intercultural leadership and hospitality business models. Their relationship remained respectful, but it was clear that a certain connection was starting to take shape. Claire noticed it in the pauses during meetings, the way he would pull out a chair for her or wait for her take before making a final decision. As the weeks passed, her routine began to settle. Claire added personal touches to her apartment, a plant on the kitchen table, photos of her parents on a shelf, and a small frame with a handwritten quote that read, "Start with what you have." The walk to the office, which she made on foot even on the windiest days, became a quiet ritual of belonging. She'd taken the rush of bicycles, the locals with bags of fresh bread, and the way the frozen canals mirrored the cityscape. She felt part of something meaningful, not just a promising project, but a life she was building for herself, step by step. Midway through her second week, Ethan asked her to personally review contracts with a local interior design firm. The meeting, scheduled for 1 hour, stretched into nearly 5. When it ended, he suggested they stop by a small, tucked-away pastry shop nearby. They sat at a table by the window, each with an espresso in hand. Ethan asked how she was handling the transition. Claire, without sugarcoating it, said she was exhausted but content. She admitted the pace was intense, but for once, everything felt purposeful. He listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. Then he said, simply, that her presence had shifted the rhythm of the project. Claire gave a small nod in thanks. She was used to solving problems and delivering results, but not to receiving direct recognition, especially from someone like Ethan. The following days solidified Claire's presence as an operational leader. During a meeting with Dutch investors, It was she who presented the core data, answered questions, and defended key points confidently, without needing Ethan to step in. At the end of the presentation, he leaned over and said quietly with a slight smile, "If this were a chess match, you would have won in 12 moves." Claire returned a small smile and mentally noted what she still wanted to improve. The connection between them grew quietly, without declarations but through gestures that spoke volumes. There was mutual trust that didn't need to be constantly affirmed. They both knew they were building something together, and it went far beyond walls, floors, or hotel lobbies. One Sunday, after walking through street markets, Claire came across a stand selling handcrafted notebooks. She picked one with a navy blue cover and slightly textured pages. When she got home, she sat at the kitchen table and wrote on the first page, "Everything is built." She closed the notebook, made a simple dinner, and spent the rest of the night reviewing the plans for the upcoming week. She thought of her parents, of growing up in Boston, of the day she believed she'd never move beyond a string of temp jobs. Now, even far from everything she once knew, she felt grounded. And finally, she no longer felt alone. As the hotel project moved forward, meetings between Claire and Ethan became a core part of their daily routine. What had started as occasional, focused discussions turned into a consistent practice. They reviewed timelines, design decisions, and strategic hires, often slipping into topics that extended well beyond business. Claire began joining international investor calls, officially representing the company's European operations. She spoke with clarity and confidence, and her understanding of both the logistical and cultural layers of the project impressed everyone in the room. Ethan always introduced her not as his assistant, but as a key figure in Blake International's expansion. That kind of visibility brought new responsibilities, and Claire met them with capability and composure. One weekend, with no meeting scheduled, Ethan invited her to visit his home in Amstelveen, a quiet residential area just outside Amsterdam. The house was spacious, designed with clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, and neutral-tone furnishings. It was a stark contrast to the fast-paced energy of the office. There, away from deadlines, Ethan cooked dinner himself. A simple risotto, white wine, and soft jazz in the background. They talked about books, childhood films, college memories. Claire told him about the notebook where she kept ideas for a personal project, a piece on informal diplomacy in everyday life. Ethan listened with full attention. No interruptions, no rush. When she finished, he simply said, "You think clearly, and you write the same way." It wasn't an empty compliment, and Claire knew it. That night, back home, Claire couldn't fall asleep right away. The conversation, the setting, his gestures, everything stayed with her. It wasn't the kind of connection she'd expected. In fact, she'd long ago decided that relationships had no place in her life plan. After a difficult breakup and the choice to pursue solo motherhood through insemination, she had built strong emotional walls. But there was something about Ethan that disarmed those defenses. It wasn't charm. It was presence. He didn't try to impress or invade. He simply showed up, steady, consistent, attentive, and that affected her more than any romantic gesture ever could. Over time, the boundaries between work and personal life became harder to define. Lunches ran longer. Messages outside office hours became normal. Little confidences slipped into conversations about project logistics. Claire noticed glances from the team, hushed remarks, but she wasn't fazed. She knew her place had been earned through performance. Ethan, on his part, remained discreet. He never overstepped, but it was obvious he trusted her more than anyone else. In meetings with external partners, he routinely deferred decisions to her without hesitation. Slowly, it became clear to everyone that what they had was more than just a well-functioning collaboration. It was a genuine partnership. One rainy Monday night, after a long session with suppliers, Ethan invited her to dinner. This time, he chose a tiny restaurant tucked away on a narrow street far from tourist areas. The atmosphere was quiet, the lighting low, only a handful of tables. During dessert, he spoke plainly. "If we weren't working together, I would have asked you out a long time ago." Claire looked down for a moment, took a deep breath, and replied, "And what if I said I've thought about that too?" The silence that followed lasted a few seconds, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was space they both needed. When our eyes met again, there was no doubt. As they left the restaurant, Ethan walked her to the car. He didn't make a move. He just said, "We can take our time. Nothing has to change unless you want it to." Claire nodded. It was exactly what she needed to hear. That night, at home, Claire opened her notebook. She flipped through the pages until she found the one where she had written, "Everything is built." Just below it, she added, "True connections don't require urgency." She closed the notebook, turned off the lights, and lay in bed with her thoughts quiet. She didn't feel the burden of letting someone in her life. She felt light, because what was unfolding, quietly, gradually, was built on respect, deliberate choices, and an admiration that grew without rushing. And the hotel project, so tangible and structured, felt like a mirror of what they were building between them. 2 weeks had passed since their dinner at that small restaurant, and Claire and Ethan had settled into a rhythm that felt almost natural. There were no grand gestures, no defining conversations about what they were becoming, but something had shifted. Their glances lingered a little longer. Their smiles appeared more often. Even on the most intense days, a sense of ease emerged in the moments they spent together. At the office, the pace remained high. Claire coordinated weekly reports, kept construction deadlines on track, and managed suppliers in 3 different languages. At the end of each day, Ethan made a point to sit with her and go over the progress, a routine that had started as just part of the job, but now felt more like a quiet ritual between them. On a cold Friday, Ethan invited her to visit a place he considered special, the Amsterdam Public Library. He said it was the one spot where he could truly think without distractions. They walked side by side along the canal, trading childhood stories like they were discovering lighter versions of themselves. Claire was charmed by the modern building, its flawless organization, and the quiet floors stacked with books. Inside, they whispered about old novels and favorite authors. When they reached the top floor, they sat near a window, watching the IJ River reflect the cloudy sky. Ethan mentioned that he often came there when he needed clarity. Claire listened without saying a word. He rarely spoke so openly about himself, and that said more than any direct admission. From that day on, the invitations came more often, but without pressure. They weren't formal plans, just natural suggestions. A Saturday coffee, a Sunday stroll through the park, a stop at an antique market. Claire, though deeply focused on her responsibilities, started to realize that Ethan's presence in her daily life was no longer incidental. She woke up with more energy, not because she relied on him, but because their interactions fueled her. He respected her decisions, asked insightful questions, valued her ideas. He never tried to shield her from tough choices. He simply stood beside her when they came. One night, after an important presentation to a group of German investors, Ethan offered Claire a ride home. In the car, as they drove through the quiet streets of Amsterdam, she told him she had revisited an old plan to become a mother through insemination. She spoke plainly, without hesitation, explaining that she had been saving for years and, despite everything that had changed, that desire remained. Ethan stayed silent for a few moments. Then he asked sincerely, "Do you want to do it now?" Claire nodded. He simply said, "If it matters to you, then it matters to me too." No judgment, no hesitation. And to Claire, That meant more than any compliment ever could. Later that week, Ethan asked to speak with her after work. They met in the new office space, now furnished and fully operational. He had made 2 coffees and waited while she finished a spreadsheet. When she came over, he began calmly, "I've been thinking about what you told me." Claire stayed silent, listening. "I want you to know that no matter what happens between us, I support your decision. I don't see any issue with you building your family. You have every right to do it your way." It wasn't a proposal. It wasn't a hint. It was a clear statement of support. Claire felt a warmth rise in her chest. She'd heard so many variations of silence or discomfort when she'd spoken about this plan in the past. But this response, simple and steady, was unlike anything she'd known. That night, in her apartment, Claire sat at the kitchen table with her notebook open. She flipped through the pages until she found the one where she had written, "True connections don't require urgency." Beside it, she wrote, "The one walking beside you doesn't restrict you, they empower you." She stared at the words for a while. This wasn't about romance anymore. It wasn't about career. It was about freedom, about continuing to be herself, even when someone chose to stay. The past few months had reshaped how she viewed the future. It wasn't about starting over. It was about moving forward. And among all the important decisions she was preparing to make, continuing with her plan for motherhood remained one of the most meaningful, with or without a partner. In the weeks that followed, Claire and Ethan settled into a calm, increasingly seamless rhythm. Office meetings remained productive. Lunch breaks often stretched out, and their time together after hours had become part of a routine they both seemed to value, even if they never gave a name. Dinners at cozy bistros around the city, evening walks along the canals, conversations that flowed without watching the clock. Ethan respected Claire's space, but his presence was constant, and that alone created a steady form of intimacy. The hotel project was also progressing well. Construction on the historic building in the Jordan district was entering its final phase, with the official opening scheduled for 3 months later. Claire, now with a team under her leadership, was confidently managing entire operations. She was mentioned in strategic emails, referenced in meetings with investors, and recognized by many as the person ensuring everything stayed on track. One quiet evening over dinner at Ethan's apartment, he caught her by surprise. After dessert, he placed a folder on the table and told her he wanted her to review something before the next morning's meeting. Claire opened it, unaware of what she was about to read. At the top of the first page, it said, "Almeida Blake, Amsterdam Unit." She frowned slightly, trying to make sense of it. "You changed the name of the hotel?" she asked, looking at him. Ethan nodded casually. "Because this project is as much yours as it is mine." Claire stayed silent for a moment, absorbing the gesture. It wasn't just a tribute. It was a public validation, a clear way of acknowledging the role she had played in building it all. She held the papers firmly and said only, "Thank you. That means a lot." Ethan replied calmly, "I know exactly how much." The next day, the new name was announced to the team during a general meeting. The reception was warm. Many already saw Claire as the one who orchestrated the behind-the-scenes work with precision and authority. But for her, the moment carried deeper meaning. It was symbolic. It wasn't just about seeing her name on signage. It was about shouldering the responsibility of that name. It was about becoming part of something greater, not as a supporting figure, but as a leader. That same afternoon, on her way home, Claire paused outside the construction site and stood for a few minutes, watching the scaffolding wrapped in tarps. She tried to picture the lobby fully finished, the furniture in place, the flow of guests, the smell of freshly brewed coffee in the morning. This wasn't just imagination anymore. It was real. Back home, she sat on the couch, took a deep breath, and called Professor Van Doren. She wanted to tell him personally. She talked about the new title, the recognition she had received, how something that once felt so distant was now tangible. The professor, with his gentle and deliberate voice, replied, "You've made it, Claire." She smiled on the other end of the line. "I'm still getting there, Professor. But now it feels possible." When the call ended, she stared at her phone for a while, then picked up her notebook and wrote. Giving things a name is how we acknowledge they exist. She felt tired but light. She knew the challenges would only grow, but she was ready. It was no longer about building. It was about solidifying. That weekend, Ethan invited her to dinner at a quiet restaurant just outside the city. The ambience was peaceful, the music soft. During dessert, he pulled a small box from his pocket. Claire's stomach tightened, unsure of what to expect. He opened it to reveal a silver ring with a discreet blue stone. "This isn't a proposal," he said right away. "It's a promise that I'll stand beside you for whatever comes, with no rush, no pressure." Claire held the ring gently. "I didn't expect this," she whispered. "Neither did I," he replied. "But some things only make sense when they happen." She slid the ring onto her finger, not just accepting a gift, but accepting a gesture, a space, a mutual decision. Back in her apartment, Claire placed the small box in the drawer of her desk and sat on the edge of the bed. The city outside was quiet, but her mind was still spinning. She opened the notebook to a blank page and calmly wrote, "Not all promises need to be spoken aloud. Some are built through actions." She closed the notebook, turned off the lights, and lay down. Something inside her was shifting, not a dramatic change, but the steady accumulation of choices made with care, steps taken with intention, bonds formed with mutual respect. And that night, she fell asleep with the rare sense of being exactly where she was meant to be, by merit, by choice, and by mutual commitment. As construction neared completion, Claire and Ethan began visiting the site almost daily. Decisions about finishes, fabric selections, budget reviews, and supplier approvals demanded both speed and precision. Claire, now formally introduced as the Director of International Operations, was required at nearly every final stage. She was respected not only for her technical knowledge, but also for the way she listened, made decisions, and communicated. Still, one question lingered quietly in her mind. What exactly existed between her and Ethan? Their connection, built through small gestures and constant exchanges, had no label, no framework. It was a presence, a consistency, something that didn't need to be explained but sometimes begged to be acknowledged. On a gray Tuesday, during a visit to a linen supplier in the Harlem area, Ethan casually mentioned he'd need to travel to Paris for a few days for a meeting with the board. Claire nodded, keeping her attention on the fabric sample in her hands. But that evening, alone in her apartment, she felt an emptiness she couldn't ignore. She sat at the kitchen table, opened her notebook, and wrote, "Absence only hurts when someone already belongs." She closed the notebook, made herself some tea, and tried to review reports and read up on hospitality management. But her focus was gone. She went to bed late, her thoughts tangled. While Ethan was away, Claire kept to her schedule with precision. She led meetings, answered emails, and handled operational tasks. Even so, she noticed the quiet. He sent short, practical messages like, "How are the elevators?" or "Did the lobby art arrive?" Always to the point. She replied efficiently, keeping it strictly professional. On the third morning, when she arrived at the office, she found a small package on her desk. No note. Inside was a rare book on hotel architecture she had mentioned weeks earlier. She smiled without realizing, running her fingers over the cover. Looking up, she saw Ethan at a distance, watching her with an expression that needed no words. Later that same day, they met to go over the week's plan. The conversation started out focused on work, But at one point, Ethan said, "I've missed our talks." Claire responded without hesitation, "Me too." There was a pause. Nothing else needed to be said. Afterward, they went for coffee nearby, walking side by side on the cobblestone streets. They chatted about everyday things, the weather, crowded trains, Dutch bureaucracy. But there was comfort in it. Those seemingly casual talks were part of a quiet, steady process of building something more enduring. At the end of the coffee break, Ethan looked at her and asked, "Dinner at my place tonight?" Claire hesitated a second, then answered, "Yes." Dinner was simple. He made a light pasta, opened a bottle of white wine, and played soft instrumental music. They sat on the balcony, overlooking the canals lit by old-fashioned street lamps. The conversation started with the project, but soon drifted into childhood memories, stories about grandparents, tough choices, and hard-earned lessons. Claire shared how she'd learned to fend for herself at 15 after her mother passed away. Ethan spoke about the quiet pain of being raised by his grandfather after losing his parents far too soon. It was rare for him to open up like that. When he took her hand, she didn't pull away. She let herself stay. Neither of them felt the need to rush. The next morning, Claire woke early and returned home before sunrise. She had an important presentation with Belgian suppliers and wanted time to review her notes. Once home, she got dressed for work, sat at her desk, and opened her notebook. At the top of a blank page, she wrote, "Some boundaries don't need to be crossed. Just knowing they're open is enough." She stood up, grabbed her folder of documents, and left, feeling a lightness she hadn't felt in a long time. She was living something new. No labels, no urgency, but it was real. Just like the hotel, steadily taking shape outside, her life, on the inside, was also being built with care. As the hotel's grand opening drew closer, the work pace intensified. Claire now spent hours on site overseeing the final touches, double-checking timelines with engineers and designers, and coordinating the training of a staff that was gradually taking shape. Despite the pressure, there was a quiet satisfaction in watching her lead everything with such precision. Ethan was splitting his time between Amsterdam and Paris, where the Blake International headquarters still required his presence. Yet he kept in constant contact with Claire, through calls and messages. And with each of his temporary absences, it became even clearer how much a part of each other's lives they had become. When they reunited, there was rarely a need for words. A glance, a gesture, the way they waited for one another. Everything was already understood. On a soft, sunny Saturday, Ethan invited her to spend the weekend in The Hague at a house he had recently purchased with the idea of establishing a strategic base in the country. The place was spacious and quiet, with large windows facing a neat lawn and carefully trimmed trees. They cooked together, reviewed reports over dinner, and walked through quiet residential streets where time seemed to slow. During one of their conversations, Claire shared more about her personal journey with artificial insemination. She explained she had already scheduled appointments, completed the necessary tests, and never abandoned that old plan. Ethan listened without interruption, full of respect. When she finished, he simply asked how he could support her. Claire thanked him, but said she had prepared to do it on her own. He replied calmly, "That doesn't change how I feel, or what I'm building with you." The following Monday, Claire arrived at the office to find a small flower arrangement on her desk. No note, but she recognized the soft colors and the exact species she had once mentioned in a passing conversation weeks earlier. She didn't comment to anyone, just smiled, knowing it was from him. Throughout that week, she and Ethan worked together to finalize details for a pre-opening event reserved for partners and staff. Claire was in charge of choosing the catering, curating the background music, and preparing the opening remarks. Ethan supported each step, but gave her complete autonomy. At the end of each day, they reviewed everything side by side. He wasn't managing her, he was walking with her. It was a kind of support Claire had never experienced before. Light, steady, present. On the night of the pre-opening, Claire wore an elegant, understated outfit that emphasized her poise while reflecting her natural calm. She arrived at the nearly finished lobby and was greeted with smiles and respectful greetings. Everyone there knew who she was. They knew her journey through the project. Ethan arrived minutes later, quiet as always. When they saw each other, he approached and said only, "The hotel looks flawless." "So do you?" Claire thanked him, keeping a neutral tone. But the way their eyes met said far more than any scripted line could. After the event, Claire went up to the top floor to inspect the presidential suite. Ethan followed. At the door, she turned and asked in a near whisper, "Are you sure about all of this?" And he replied, directly, without hesitation, "I'm sure about you." They spent the night there, sitting on the sofa, sharing the leftover wine from the reception, laughing about small glitches from the event, and talking about what came next. Claire opened up more than usual. She spoke about the fear of not being enough, the nights she almost gave up, the days she doubted herself. Ethan listened quietly, never trying to fix anything, just fully present. When she finally fell asleep, he sat for a while, watching her peaceful face, her hair loose on the pillow, the steady rhythm of her breath. The next morning, they woke before sunrise. They went down to have breakfast with the staff, quietly, as if the night before had only confirmed what had long been true. They were together. Not by chance, by choice. Later that same week, Claire went to the clinic for a routine checkup. She expected nothing more than an update, but left with unexpected news. At home, she sat at the kitchen table and opened the envelope carefully. She stayed there, silent, for several long minutes. Then, she picked up her phone and called Ethan, asking him to come over. When he arrived, she handed him the paper without saying a word. He read it carefully, then looked up and asked quietly, "You're pregnant?" Claire nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. Twins. Ethan's expression shifted. There was no shock, just deep, quiet emotion. He pulled her into a tight embrace and said, "We're ready." Claire didn't respond right away. She simply leaned her head against his chest and stayed there. The news of the pregnancy brought a new layer of preparation into Claire and Ethan's routine. The hotel project was already well established, and the official opening of the Blake Amsterdam was just a few weeks away. Claire remained fully committed to her work, but now she structured her schedule more carefully, delegated tasks more clearly, and leaned on the growing support of the team she had helped shape. Ethan, for his part, began focusing his agenda entirely on Amsterdam, cutting back travel to Paris and other branches of the company. Evenings that had once been filled with spreadsheets and remote meetings were now spent discussing what lay ahead. The arrival of the babies, adjustments to their professional lives, what they wanted to preserve, and what they were willing to change. While Claire attended medical appointments, prepared her leave paperwork, and adapted to the physical changes of pregnancy, Ethan took charge of adapting the apartment. One of the rooms was carefully turned into a nursery. They chose simple furniture, soft neutral colors, and delicate details, bird illustrations, knitted blankets, children's books placed on low shelves. Every decision was practical, thoughtful, and without fuss. They talked about names, early childhood phases, shared articles about multiple births, and exchanged messages with specialists recommended by trusted friends. Still, they made time to walk along the canals at sunset or stop for hot chocolate in cozy cafes they kept discovering together. As Claire's belly grew, she reduced her visits to the construction site, but remained involved in all key decisions. Her team already recognized her leadership, and her physical absence was never mistaken for disengagement. During the final week of rehearsals for the grand opening, Marissa Collins, a former supervisor from the New York branch, flew in to oversee the event. Upon seeing Claire, she was moved to tears. "I always knew you wouldn't stay where you started." Ethan watched the exchange from a distance, filled with pride and respect. He knew that Claire, in that moment, represented more than just the executive behind the project. She embodied everything he hoped the company would stand for: excellence with humanity. On opening night, the hotel glowed with understated elegance. The lobby lighting highlighted the light wood panels, artwork from local artists, and the fresh floral scents Claire had selected herself. Ethan opened the event with a short, direct speech, thanking the team and their partners. Then he called Claire forward and announced her promotion to Director of European Operations for the Blake Group. Her name, alongside his, would now be attached to every international project outside the United States. Claire, wearing a tasteful dress that gently outlined her baby bump, spoke with clarity and confidence. The camera caught the subtle sparkle of the blue ring on her hand. Her gaze, however, was fixed on the future, on what was still to come. In the following days, the hotel welcomed its first guests. Routines began to stabilize. Claire spent more time at home, but monitored everything remotely with her usual precision. Her medical checkups showed the pregnancy was progressing well, and Ethan made a point to be present for every appointment. Their conversations now included topics like hiring a nanny, possibly moving to a bigger apartment, and how to balance future expansion plans with parenting. Ethan mentioned a potential project in Berlin. Claire listened, reflected, but made it clear she would return to work on her own timeline with the boundaries this new life required. On a cold Sunday, they sat on the balcony of their apartment. The canal below mirrored the pale sky. Claire, wrapped in a blanket, stared at the view in silence. After a while, she said, "It took years for someone to really see me." Ethan, holding her hand, replied with quiet strength, "No one can look away now." She smiled, touched her belly gently, and added, "But I never forget who I was." Ethan nodded. In that still morning, there was no doubt that they would continue together. Not out of convenience, not by chance, but because they had chosen each other, steadily, intentionally. The family they were building had become the center around which everything else was now arranged. And everything they had built at last had roots. The end. So, what did you think of this story? Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to keep enjoying stories like this one. See you next time.